He didn't belong there, or so they decided the moment they saw his dark skin and worn clothes, their laughter echoing in sleek hallways lined with power and money. To them, he was easy to label, easy to dismiss, a punchline for their private jokes. But they never asked why he sat so quietly, watching them with eyes that gave nothing away. They didn't know this meeting wasn't for his benefit, but for theirs, that the decision wasn't theirs to make. When the truth came, it wasn't loud or violent. It was a single sentence that stripped them bare, exposing who held the real power all along. If stories about justice, betrayal, and the downfall of arrogance pull you in, hit like, subscribe for more, and share your thoughts in the comments. Tell us where you're watching from and what you'd do if the world tried to put you in a box you refuse to fit. Ellis Corbin pushed open the heavy glass door of Holloway and Price Capital, the cold wind from the Chicago River slamming at his back one last time before sealing him in the silent, cathedral-like lobby. He looked around with practiced caution, trying not to seem intimidated by the polished marble floors that reflected the glow of recessed lighting like a frozen lake. His clothes were plain functional, a light blue button-down that hung a bit loose on his frame, brown chinos he had ironed carefully that morning, and well-worn boots with scratches along the sides, polished but undeniably scuffed. The canvas bag slung over his shoulder was faded and fraying at the edges. He knew what he looked like, not rich, not powerful, but he belonged here, or so he told himself. He paused, steadying his breathing, and forced himself to move forward with the calm, confident steps he had practiced. He could feel eyes flicking his way as he advanced toward the security desk that served as a gatekeeper between the opulent lobby and the mirrored elevators beyond. Suited men and women in the seating area looked over their Wall Street journals and flat whites, just long enough to size him up before dismissing him with a flicker of indifference. He saw their lips curl slightly, the way they subtly turned their knees away from him. He held his head high, ignoring it, but every step felt like walking through a field of daggers. As he approached the polished wood podium, the security guard, a broad-shouldered man with military buzz cut and a prominent jaw, shifted, planting himself more firmly in front of Ellis's path, his expression settling into bored hostility. "Hold up," the guard barked before Ellis could even open his mouth. His voice cut the hush of the lobby, drawing attention like blood in the water. Ellis's stomach clenched. He offered a small, polite nod. "Morning," he said, voice even. The guard didn't return the greeting. His eyes roamed deliberately over Ellis's clothes and bag. His lip twitched with barely contained disdain. "Vendors use the back door," he said with slow, deliberate emphasis, as if explaining something to a slow child. Ellis blinked, momentarily thrown. He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. He tried to sound patient, professional. "I'm not a vendor," he said. "I have a meeting. Boardroom. 9 o'clock. He made his voice firm but not aggressive, as if careful handling might calm the situation. The guard let out a single snort of laughter that seemed to bounce off the marble walls. 2 interns wearing lanyards were passing behind Ellis. They turned, watched openly, their faces lighting up with cruel amusement. "Boardroom," the guard repeated, the word dripping with disbelief. "Right." He exaggerated the syllable. "You sure you're not here to fix the toilets? Or drop off lunch?" One of the interns snickered audibly. Ellis felt his face flush. His fingers tightened on the strap of his bag. He fought the urge to look away, to shrink back. He tried to project calm, even as his heart hammered in his chest. "My name is Ellis Corbin. I'm here to see Ms. Albright and Mr. Reese. 9 a.m. meeting. I'm expected." He carefully enunciated each word, but his voice cracked slightly at the end, betraying his anxiety. The guard's smirk widened. He didn't move. He didn't check a list. He didn't even pretend to believe him. Instead, he leaned back on the podium and jerked his thumb behind him. "Back doors that way. Vendors and service use it." He turned slightly, making it clear the conversation was over. Ellis hesitated. Every eye in the lobby seemed to be on him now. The interns were barely containing their laughter. One nudged the other and stage whispered, "Dude, bet he's got a mop in that bag." His friend burst out laughing, so hard he had to cover his mouth with his hand. Ellis felt the shame crawl up his neck, hot and raw. He swallowed hard. "Please," he said, hating the way the words sounded in his mouth. The security guard turned back, eyebrow raised mockingly. What was that? Ellis's lips pressed into a thin line. He exhaled slowly, trying to center himself. "Please, I'm here for a meeting. Can you call up?" The guard stared at him for a beat, then huffed. "Reception can deal with you." He motioned to the desk across the marble floor. The receptionist had been watching the whole time. She hadn't even tried to hide it. Her headset glinted in the sterile overhead lights. As Ellis turned toward her, she gave him a look of polite disgust, like she was examining something unpleasant stuck to her shoe. He forced himself forward. He held out his folder with shaking fingers. Ellis Corbin, 9 a.m. with Ms. Albright and Mr. Reese. She didn't take the folder. She didn't even glance at the paper. Instead, she adjusted her headset and leaned back slightly in her chair. "Maintenance?" "Janitorial," she asked, voice carrying effortlessly through the cavernous space. Ellis froze. Her tone was deliberately loud, designed to embarrass. The intern snickered. One actually slapped the other's arm, delighted. He wouldn't plead. He wouldn't apologize for being here. He deserved to be here. He'd earned it. He had the right. But none of that seemed to matter in this gleaming glass mausoleum where they weighed worth in tailor-made suits and smooth haircuts and subtle sneers. He adjusted his collar, feeling sweat start to chill on his neck in the over-air-conditioned lobby. Across the room, the security guard hadn't stopped watching him. He leaned against his podium like a king on his throne, smirking. The two interns who had jeered at him before had posted up on one of the fancy leather couches, tapping at their phones. One kept glancing up at Ellis and stifling laughter, jabbing his friend in the ribs. The second one lifted his phone and, with exaggerated subtlety, aimed it in Ellis's direction. Ellis felt his cheeks burn. He turned slightly, pretending to study the framed black and white photos on the wall. Shots of corporate partners shaking hands over model skyscrapers, all smiles, all expensive watches, all white faces. He tried to focus on his breathing. In, out, calm. He had to stay calm. The receptionist, meanwhile, put the call on speaker. She snapped her gum. "Yeah, so he says board meeting? MHM. Right. Oh yeah, he says he's executive negotiations." Her eyebrows lifted and she rolled her eyes so dramatically that her headset nearly fell off. The intern snorted. "You hear that?" one said to the other. "Executive negotiations. Dude's about to sell mops in bulk." They both cackled so loudly that even the security guard grinned. He picked up his own radio, thumb pressing the side button with lazy contempt. Yeah, he said into it. "We got a guy down here. Claims he's here for executive negotiations. Says he's got a meeting with Albright and Reese." "Yeah, I know. You want us to send him around back?" "No." Sure. We'll keep him here. Over." Ellis winced. The words "claims he's here for executive negotiations" rang out over the lobby PA like a twisted joke. He lowered his eyes to his bag, hating how tight his throat felt. He refused to look at anyone. He could feel the security guard's gaze drilling into him, waiting for him to crack. The interns weren't done. One leaned over the back of the sofa, phone pointed directly at Ellis now. "Bro, smile," he called, his voice dripping mockery. "We're live in Slack. The team's loving this. Say janitor budget meeting." The other nearly fell off the couch laughing. Ellis's shoulders hunched tighter. He could hear notifications buzzing from their phones. He imagined the entire office upstairs watching, sharing, forwarding. He'd become their morning entertainment. The receptionist glanced at her monitor, pretending to be busy while smirking behind her hair. She said loudly enough for him to hear, "God, it's like they'll let anyone claim they're an executive these days." Another employee walked past the desk, a tall man in a tailored gray suit with hair styled to precision. He slowed when he saw Ellis. His lips twitched. "Problem?" he asked the receptionist in a voice like crushed velvet, oozing polite condescension. She leaned in confidentially. "Guy says he's got a big deal meeting. Boardroom and everything. Albright and Reese. Look at him." The man glanced at Ellis, eyes sweeping over the faded clothes, the scuffed boots, the worn bag. He snorted softly. "Right. Good luck with that." He winked at the receptionist, then strolled off without acknowledging Ellis at all. The interns shared another laugh, one muttering, "Bet he didn't even graduate high school." Ellis wanted to say something. He wanted to stand up and shout at them, to demand his dignity back. But he couldn't. Not here. Not now. He needed this meeting. He needed them to open the elevator doors for him. He needed them to let him upstairs. So he sat frozen, swallowing his anger, tasting blood where he'd bitten the inside of his cheek. Another employee arrived. A woman in her late 20s, wearing designer heels that clacked importantly across the marble. She stopped at the desk, taking in the scene with mild amusement. "What's going on?" The receptionist waved her off like it was nothing. "Oh, just a mix-up. Someone claiming to be a VIP." The woman raised an eyebrow, turned to look at Ellis with polite but clear disgust, then actually had the gall to lean over and whisper not quietly enough, "You sure he's not dangerous?" Ellis flinched like she'd slapped him. The security guard heard it and chuckled. "We got it covered," he said, patting his radio. Ellis felt the fury twist in his gut, a hot, corrosive burn, but he forced himself to stand slowly, adjusting his bag on his shoulder to keep his hands busy so they wouldn't shake. He took a steadying breath and crossed the marble floor, the muted squeak of his boots too loud in the hush of hushed phone calls and tapping laptops. He approached the desk, his folder held carefully in front of him like a shield. The receptionist didn't meet his eyes. She was already typing again. "Yeah," she asked without inflection. Ellis cleared his throat. "I'm ready if you can call them again. I'm on their calendar." She let out an audible huff and pressed a button on her headset. "Yeah, he's still here. MHM. I know. Yeah, okay." She paused and made an exaggerated show of checking her monitor, though Ellis could see the screen was on a browser window with social media tabs blinking with notifications. She finally sighed and set her headset aside. "Take the elevator to floor 29. Reception up there will deal with you." The way she spat out the word "deal" made his teeth grind. But he said nothing. He just nodded, voice catching slightly as he managed a quiet, "Thank you." He turned to the elevator, noticing the interns still whispering to each other, one pretending to bow with dramatic flourish. "Your Highness," the kid sneered as Ellis passed. The security guard snorted with appreciation, his thumb still resting on the radio like he expected to call for backup any second. Ellis punched the elevator button harder than necessary and waited, eyes forward, face blank. When the doors opened, he stepped inside alone. The silence of the ride was absolute except for the soft hum of the machinery, carrying him toward what was supposed to be his big break, the meeting he dreamed about. But instead, his thoughts twisted with every humiliating second downstairs, the memory of laughter stabbing at his pride. The doors slid open on 29 with a smooth hiss. He stepped out onto a floor covered in plush gray carpet that muffled his footsteps immediately. This lobby was even more luxurious than the one downstairs, with contemporary art on the walls, massive windows flooding the space with city light, and chairs that probably cost more than his monthly rent. The woman at the reception desk up here looked up immediately. She had sleek dark hair pulled into a bun, so tight it looked painful, pearl earrings flashing under the recessed lighting. Her eyes flicked over Ellis and instantly lost all warmth. He wasn't surprised. He'd seen that look too many times today. But he forced himself to walk forward with something like confidence. He spoke clearly. "Ellis Corbin, 9 a.m. meeting with Ms. Albright and Mr. Reese." Her eyebrow arched sharply. "Do you have an appointment?" she asked, as if he hadn't just said he did. He held out the email confirmation. She didn't reach for it. Instead, she picked up her landline with exaggerated care and turned slightly away from him. He heard the click of buttons, the hushed voice as she spoke low into the receiver. "Yes. There's a man here. Says he has a meeting. MHM. No, I don't recognize him. Brown shirt. Chinos. Bag. Yes. Oh, okay." She hung up with a hard click and turned back, not even pretending to be polite. "Please have a seat," she said, motioning vaguely to a row of chairs that faced the wall rather than the windows. Ellis swallowed, stepping over. The chairs were deliberately uncomfortable, narrow, and hard-backed, designed to remind visitors of their place. He sat carefully, balancing the folder on his lap, trying not to show how badly his hands were trembling now. He waited and waited. The clock on the wall ticked over to 9:05, then 9:12, then 9:19. Every passing minute was another blow to his composure. He could hear the receptionist fielding calls, her voice switching to syrupy charm when she greeted other visitors. "Mr. Davidson, welcome, please go right in. They're expecting you." A middle-aged white man in an immaculate navy suit breezed past, giving Ellis only the briefest glance before dismissing him entirely. Moments later, a tall blonde woman in an expensive sheath dress arrived, laughing into her phone. The receptionist nearly jumped to greet her, offering her coffee, asking if she needed anything. "They're ready for you," she cooed. Ellis clenched his teeth so hard his jaw ached. At 9:27 a.m., man in an ill-fitting gray suit arrived carrying only a cheap laptop bag, but the receptionist stood to greet him too, smiling like they were old friends. "Right this way," she said, voice honey-sweet. Ellis wanted to scream. Instead, he sat, fingers tightening around his folder, so hard he thought it might snap. He paused at the tall frosted glass door, inhaled deeply to calm the tremble in his chest, then pushed it open. The room felt quiet in the wrong way. Not polite quiet, appraising quiet. The long oak table gleamed under cold recessed lighting. 7 pairs of eyes turned to him, all framed by expensive suits and haircuts that cost more than his entire outfit. He hesitated in the doorway, hating how small he felt. He forced himself forward. He tried to smile. "Good morning," he said, voice just slightly tight. "Ellis Corbin, thank you for your time." He walked to the head of a table where the HDMI cable snaked from a display. He flipped open his folder to double-check his notes, pulling the USB drive free with careful precision. He dared to look up. Sloan Albright, the senior partner, watched him with one eyebrow cocked in open skepticism, fingers drumming the table. Next to her, Jonah Reese was slouched so low in his chair he looked bored out of his mind, scrolling on his phone until Sloan elbowed him. Ellis cleared his throat and fumbled to plug in the drive. The screen behind him flickered to life, and for a moment hope fluttered in his chest, until he saw what actually came up. His slides were wrong. They were grainy JPEGs, resolution so bad the text bled into unreadable smears. Colors clashed neon against black. Tables were cut off mid-column, labels missing. Even the title slide had his name misspelled. He blinked so hard it hurt, his pulse hammering in his ears. He tried to hide the panic in his voice. Sorry. One moment. I think the resolution's off." He fumbled with the remote, clicking back and forth. Each slide looked worse than the last. Bar graphs with no legends, pie charts half erased, numbers misaligned. Data he had checked 10 times was simply gone. He heard the first snicker. He turned to see Reese smirking, phone still in hand. Sloane's eyes narrowed, but not in confusion, in irritation. "Is this supposed to be your analysis?" she asked, voice flat and sharp enough to shave glass. Ellis's mouth went dry. He managed, "These aren't the right versions." "Someone must have." She cut him off with a single raised palm. "Don't insult us, Mr. Corbin. If you can't manage your own materials, that's on you." Ellis shook his head slightly, feeling the room swim. He wanted to explain that he had finalized these last night, that they'd been perfect, that somehow they'd been swapped or corrupted. But he also knew how it would sound, an excuse. A man like him blaming the system. He heard another snort of laughter from across the table. One of the associates whispered to another, "Looks like a middle schooler made these." The other covered his mouth and shook with silent laughter. Ellis felt his ears burn. He turned back to the table. "I can talk through the correct data points," he tried. His voice cracked. He swallowed hard. I know the models by heart." Reese didn't even pretend to hide his laugh this time. He leaned back, tossing his phone on the table with a clack. "Oh yeah? Sure. Give us your best guess." Ellis's fingers tightened so hard on the folder that the worn edges tore slightly. He felt dizzy. He flipped through the papers, his handwritten notes suddenly swimming with sweat-blurred ink. He opened his mouth. Nothing came out. He forced himself to speak. "Tell you what, partner, why don't you go ahead and talk us through the numbers one more time in your, what is it, Southern charm?" He pitched his voice low and slow, twisting the vowels into a thick, mocking drawl. "Y'all see here we done gone and added up them sales projections real good." The room broke into snickers. Ellis felt his cheeks go hot. His jaw clenched so hard his teeth ached. He wanted to say something, anything, to call them out, to demand even a shred of decency. But the words curdled on his tongue. He knew the risk. He was already hanging by a thread, a guest they barely tolerated. If he pushed back, they wouldn't just laugh. They'd have security escort him out. So he stood silent, suffocating on rage and shame. Jonah wasn't done. He wiped imaginary sweat from his brow, still doing the voice. "Mr. Corbin here is gone. Explain EBITDA like it's a fried chicken recipe, huh?" A cackle went around the table, sharp and cold. Ellis tried to steady himself by breathing through his nose, fingers drumming against his folder so the shaking wouldn't be visible. He kept his eyes fixed on the table edge, refusing to let them see the wetness starting to pool at the corner of his eyes. But Jonah leaned forward, fingers steepled, expression faux serious. "Come on, Ellis," he coaxed with that shit-eating grin. "Give us a little country wisdom. Huh? Maybe show us how you count on your fingers." More laughter. This time, even Sloan let out an unamused but unmistakable snort. One of the senior associates, Taylor Wells, chimed in without looking up from his tablet, voice drawling with fake sympathy. "Jonah, come on, be nice. He's not here to do math. He's here to check our diversity box, right?" The table roared with sudden, unfiltered laughter. Ellis froze, pulse hammering in his ears, so hard he thought he might pass out. His breath felt shallow, stuck in his throat. Taylor continued, eyes still on his screen, voice dripping sarcasm. "Honestly, if we want to be inclusive, let him present to the janitorial vendor next time. Make sure everyone feels seen." The intern at the end of the table snorted so hard coffee came out his nose. He wiped at it, red-faced and giggling uncontrollably. Ellis felt his fingernails digging half-moons into the cheap leather of his folder. He forced himself to swallow, tasting bile. He tried to speak, but all that came out was a strangled whisper that no one heard. Jonah, emboldened, slapped the table. "Hell, Taylor, don't be so hard on him. I think we should let him audit our cafeteria budget. So he can work his way up to the big leagues." Another round of laughter. Even the analyst sitting against the wall chuckled nervously, clearly too junior to risk not joining in. Ellis felt his vision blur at the edges. The humiliation was a physical thing now, like his own clothes were strangling him. His mouth opened, shut. He swallowed again, hard enough to make his Adam's apple bob visibly. He couldn't move, couldn't speak. He just stood there, an unmoving target for their jokes. Sloan Albright didn't bother hiding her disdain. She waved a hand dismissively in his direction without looking at him. "Gentlemen, enough. Let's be professional. We don't need to scare off the help." Jonah let out one last bray of laughter before quieting down, though his grin remained wide and mean. Taylor looked up finally, meeting Ellis's eyes with the calm cruelty of someone who didn't think he was looking at an equal. He didn't even bother hiding the contempt. "No hard feelings, man," he said slowly, voice thick with condescension. "You gotta understand, this is serious money we're talking about. $6 billion isn't play money. We can't risk someone who can't even get his slides right." Jonah stage whispered to the intern next to him, "That's billion with a B, in case he can't spell it," and made a show of counting the letters on his fingers. The intern dissolved in another fit of Snickers. Ellis stared at the table, his eyes burning, willing himself not to cry in front of them, refusing to let even a single tear betray him. But he couldn't hide the flush on his cheeks or the tremble in his shoulders. The room quieted only when Sloan cleared her throat and gestured to the analyst on her left. "Can we move on? Pull up the next agenda item. Real proposals only." And just like that, he ceased to exist. Sloan Albright finally turned her cold gray eyes toward him, One eyebrow lifted in impatient annoyance. The rest of the table quieted, but not with any kind of respect. They just wanted to see what the dancing clown would do next. Ellis swallowed hard and forced the words out. "There's been a mistake with the slides," he said evenly, despite the heat rising in his face. "Those aren't my files. Someone replaced them or corrupted them. I'd like to restart with the correct versions." For a second, no one spoke, and Ellis let himself hope he might get through. But then Sloane leaned back in her chair, fingers drumming on the table in a slow, sarcastic beat. "Mr. Corbin," she said in a tone of voice usually reserved for toddlers or dogs, "if you can't manage your own materials, that's really not our problem." Ellis felt the words hit like a slap, but he held his ground. He tried to explain anyway, voice thick but controlled. "I double-checked them last night. They were clean. Someone tampered with them or switched them out. I can prove it if you'll just give me a moment." He reached to pull out his battered laptop. Jonah Reese let out an audible groan and flopped back in his chair like a sulky teenager. "Christ, are we really doing this?" he whined to no one in particular, drawing a fresh snicker from a junior associate next to him. Ellis pressed on, ignoring the derision like it was static. He opened his screen, hands shaking so badly he had to set it on the table to steady it. He pulled up his own copy of the pitch deck, high resolution, perfectly formatted, and turned it toward the room. The numbers were clear. The charts were immaculate. The projection tables were organized with professional polish. But no one even looked at it. Sloane exhaled dramatically. "That's great," she drawled. "But you're telling us we're supposed to troubleshoot your presentation for you? Is that it?" Ellis felt his mouth go dry. "No," he said, shaking his head once, sharply. "I'm saying it's obvious this was deliberate. Someone altered it." The words spilled out of him before he could think better of it, his voice cracking with the effort to stay calm. Jonah laughed once, hard. "Conspiracy theories now? Jesus. Maybe the janitor hacked the system. Huh." Another associate covered her mouth to stifle a giggle. Sloane didn't smile. She looked at him with the icy contempt of a person who was professionally good at it. "Mr. Corbin," she said, biting off each word, "we don't fix your slides for you. If you want to pitch us for billions of dollars, maybe make sure your pitch is ready." Ellis felt the flush creeping up his neck and ears. He tried one last time. "Please, just look at these. They're correct. I can walk you through it all right now." He lifted the laptop higher, but Sloane flicked her gaze away like it physically disgusted her. Jonah made a great show of scratching his head. Hold up," he said loudly. "Wait, everyone be quiet. Let's hear the conspiracy theory. Tell us who sabotaged you, Ellis. Name names. Let's get Homeland Security on this PowerPoint terrorism." The interns behind them lost it, one of them actually choking on his laugh. Ellis felt something snap deep in his chest. His vision wavered. He blinked hard to clear it, trying to see the screen, the faces around him, anything but the hot shame crawling across his skin. Sloane raised a hand like a traffic cop and spoke over Jonah's wheezing laughter. "Enough," she said curtly, and the room fell quiet. She turned back to Ellis with pure disdain in her eyes. "You're wasting our time. This is the real world, Mr. Corbin. If you can't deliver professionally, then that's on you." She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Every word landed with the same finality as a door slamming in his face. Ellis swallowed again, tasting bile. He wanted to argue more, to point out the glaring sabotage, the childish file swaps, but he saw the faces in the room. They weren't listening. His fingers trembled, but he kept them pressed against the smooth table edge until the shaking stopped. He had spent the last hour being humiliated, dismissed, laughed at, and reduced to a punchline in front of people who had never built anything with their own hands, and he realized with absolute clarity that he had been wrong to think he needed them. He didn't. He never had. He took another breath, feeling something inside him click over from desperate to cold. He forced his voice to work. "Excuse me," he said, and for a second no one responded because they genuinely didn't expect him to speak again. Finally, Sloane blinked once, slow and reptilian, then gave him the laziest tilt of her head, a gesture that dripped with condescension. "What now, Mr. Corbin?" she asked, her voice dry enough to desiccate the air. Ellis ignored the heat in his face and forced his expression flat, careful. "I need to step out for a moment," he said evenly. Jonah let out a laugh, so sharp it actually startled one of the interns by the door. "Jesus Christ, he needs a bathroom break after all that? Don't piss yourself on the carpet, man." More laughter trickled through the room. Ellis didn't react. He simply turned and walked to the door, boots silent on the carpet that seemed designed to swallow sound, though the laughter echoed in his skull. He stepped out into the hall and let the door close behind him with a soft click. The hallway was quiet, cold, lined with generic modern art that was supposed to look expensive. He pressed his back against the wall and let out a long exhale that shuddered once, the last betrayal of his nerves. Then he slid his phone from his bag with deliberate calm, unlocked it, and scrolled to the secure chat thread marked with the name of his COO. His thumbs flew. Suspend all negotiations with Holloway and price immediately. Prepare the public statement. Cut all lines of credit. He hit send without hesitation. 3 dots appeared immediately. The reply was instant. Understood. All lines suspended. Statement drafted. Waiting for final approval. Ellis typed one more line. Do it now. A beat later. Done. He closed his eyes for one brief moment, letting the tremor roll through him and fade. When he opened them, he felt lighter. Not better, not healed, but free of the choking need for their approval. He straightened his shoulders, slipped the phone back in his bag, and turned back toward the boardroom door. He paused with his hand on the handle. He could still hear them inside. Jonah's voice, mocking in that fake southern accent. Laughter that wasn't even trying to hide anymore. He breathed in slowly, held it, let it go. Then he opened the door. The laughter didn't stop immediately. It had to die slowly, painfully, in pieces as they noticed he was back. Jonah had his feet kicked up on the chair next to him, looking like he was about to deliver the punchline of a joke that was just a little too racist to repeat in polite company. Sloane's eyes cut to Ellis without any warmth or welcome, just raw irritation that he had dared return. "Are you quite finished?" she asked, tapping the table. Jonah made a show of checking his watch. "Meeting's over, pal. You can see yourself out." Ellis didn't move from the door. He let the silence grow until it started to itch. Then he spoke, voice low and controlled. "Before I continue, you should check your phones." That got a laugh at first, an ugly, barking sound from Jonah. "Oh man, look at him, trying to be ominous. Check our phones. Is he gonna text us an apology for wasting our time?" Sloane's lips pressed into a thin, annoyed line. "We don't have time for," but one of the analysts frowned down at his device. The screen had lit up with a bank notification banner. Then another. He scrolled rapidly. His mouth opened. He didn't say anything for a moment. He just looked at Ellis with an expression that had lost all humor. Others began checking theirs, a ripple of confusion spreading like a stain. Jonah frowned, pulling his own phone from his breast pocket with exaggerated annoyance. "Jesus, fine, you want us to," he stopped. His eyes flicked over the screen once, twice. Then he sat up straighter, feet dropping to the floor with a heavy thud. "What the fuck is this?" he hissed. Sloane had her phone in hand now, the screen's glow reflected in her cold eyes. The color in her face drained slowly, like blood leaving a corpse. She didn't say anything at first. His thumb kept scrolling the same bank app screen over and over like he expected the numbers to change if he just swiped hard enough. Sloane Albright didn't say anything at first. She had gone so still she might have been carved from stone. Her phone sat on the table before her, screen still lit up with the confirmation that $6.1 billion in committed funding, money their firm had been banking on, bragging about, structuring entire acquisitions around, was now officially withdrawn. She didn't blink. She didn't look at anyone. She just stared at that number like it was the instrument of her own execution. Ellis let the silence breathe. He didn't fill it. He didn't gloat. He just waited, eyes moving from one face to another, watching the dawning comprehension replace the condescension in their eyes. They had believed him powerless. They had believed he was just another name they could mock, another nobody they could refuse to take seriously. Now they were realizing the truth. Finally, Sloane raised her eyes to him. They were sharper now, calculating, the way a general might assess an unexpected enemy who had just revealed an army on the horizon. She cleared her throat. The sound was dry and harsh in the quiet. "Mr. Corbin," she said, voice carefully measured, "I think we need to discuss this." Jonah snapped out of his stupor enough to round on her. "Discuss this," he spat, voice cracking with panic. "We're ruined. We needed that money to close the Nova acquisition. That was the last tranche. We're committed on leverage we can't unwind." He rounded on Ellis, rage fighting with terror in his eyes. "You son of a bitch, you can't do this to us." Ellis tilted his head, watching him with unsettling calm. "I'm not doing anything to you," he said in a voice that was so quiet they all had to stop moving to hear it. "You did this to yourselves." Sloane's nostrils flared as she inhaled. Her voice was brittle glass. "You've made your point. So what do you want? We can renegotiate terms. We can discuss the timeline. There's no need to be hasty." Ellis took one step forward, letting the door swing shut behind him on well-oiled hinges, so the sound of the latch seemed to echo like a verdict. He set his battered folder carefully on the table, unfastened the worn leather tie, and spread the papers out with deliberate precision. The room watched in silence, eyes flicking down to the sheets filled with small print and signature lines. Ellis looked up, meeting Sloane's gaze with a kind of weary finality. "You don't seem to understand," he said slowly. "This wasn't a pitch. It wasn't a request. This meeting was your final audit." Jonah made a choke sound. "Audit." Ellis nodded once. "I already control your parent company's voting shares." He let the sentence hang there like a hanging body. "This meeting was your last chance to prove you could manage the expansion funding responsibly." He tapped the papers with one finger. "What you were so sure was a pitch deck was an audit file. Every answer you gave, every laugh, every insult went in here." The color drained further from Sloane's face. She reached forward with jerky, unwilling fingers, flipping through the pages as though she might find a mistake, a lifeline, a reason to dismiss it. She didn't. Every page was there. Names, quotes, notes about behavior, ethics, professionalism. A written record of everything that had happened, time-stamped and witnessed. Jonah's voice went hoarse with disbelief. "You can't be serious." Ellis turned his gaze on him, eyes dark. "I'm very serious." He pointed to the final page. "Signed and notarized. Your partners at the parent fund agreed to my terms 6 months ago. This was your last check. They trusted you to pass it." He let the silence stretch while they absorbed it. "You failed." The words were flat, uninflected, but they hit like a hammer. Sloane's fingers tightened on the papers. She took a breath that shuddered audibly. "We didn't know," she whispered. "We thought." She cut herself off because there wasn't anything to finish that sentence with that wouldn't sound pathetic. Ellis didn't bother helping her. He let her drown in it. Jonah tried one last desperate gambit. "Look," he said, his voice cracking. "It doesn't have to be like this. We can fix this. We can start over. Hell, we can rework the proposal. You want better terms? We'll give you better terms." Ellis felt something twist in his chest, a distant ache that might have been pity once, but had long since calcified into something colder. He shook his head slowly. "There are no more terms," he said, voice low. "Your line is canceled. Your commitments are void. Your clients will be informed by the close of business today." He took one more breath, steadying himself, then began the long walk down the hall, leaving behind the muffled roar of executive panic that would only get louder. Inside, the transformation was immediate and vicious. As soon as Ellis left, the table erupted. Sloane Albright slammed her palms on the table hard enough to rattle water glasses, her voice cutting through the room with raw fury. "Someone call legal. Now," she barked, face flushed red and eyes wild. She grabbed her phone with fingers that trembled so hard she nearly dropped it, stabbing the screen over and over as she called the firm's general counsel. Jonah Reese was no better. He was on his feet, pacing tight circles near the window, one hand buried in his hair as he stared at his own screen with dilated pupils. "This isn't real," he kept repeating, voice cracking. "This can't be real, this can't be real." The junior associates were scrambling, trying to open their laptops, their fingers hitting keys too hard as they typed frantic emails to partners, to clients, to anyone who might have a solution. One of them called out in a thin, breaking voice, "It's already on Bloomberg." They all froze for a heartbeat, and then the room exploded with motion. Sloan rounded on the analyst who had spoken, voice sharpened to a knife's edge. "What do you mean, it's on Bloomberg?" The analyst swallowed, atoms apple bobbing visibly. It just posted. They're reporting our funding got pulled. It says Holloway and Price faces collapse after losing $6.1 billion line. It's the lead story on the business page. Jonah let out a strangled sound, dropping into his chair like he'd been shot, eyes fixed on nothing. His phone kept buzzing on the table, vibrating its way across the wood toward the edge. Calls from clients. Calls from partners. Calls they couldn't answer because they had no answers to give. Sloan's phone buzzed so violently she finally snatched it up. Her lips moved soundlessly as she read the screen, color draining from her face. Then she spoke, voice cracking. "Our biggest client just pulled their entire portfolio. They're out. They're done." A sob broke from one of the junior analysts. Another stood and backed away from the table, face pale, breathing shallow. The room filled with overlapping noise, the pings of incoming emails, the harsh ring of phones ignored, the furious click of keys, the rustle of papers and folders scattered in panic. Jonah slammed his fist into the table, the blow ringing out like a gunshot. "This is your fault," he screamed at Sloan, spit flying. "You let him in here. You didn't vet him, you didn't take him seriously." Sloan whipped her head toward him, eyes wide and bloodshot. She snarled back, voice shaking with rage and fear. "My fault? You were the one filming him, Jonah. You were the one who wouldn't shut your mouth. You made him a joke." Jonah's face went purple. He jabbed a finger at her. "Don't you dare put this on me." But Sloan was past caring about alliances. She stabbed her own finger at him. "It's viral, you idiot. It's already on Slack. Clients have the video. They're watching you mock him. You and your goddamn accent impressions. That's on you." Jonah's mouth opened, but nothing came out. He looked around the room wildly, but no one would meet his gaze. The associates were focused on their screens, faces lit by the cold glow of damage reports and desperate calculations. The analyst at the far end of the table whispered hoarsely, "Our valuation's tanking. 40%. 40 goddamn percent in 20 minutes." Sloan covered her mouth, eyes wide. "Oh my God." She dropped into her chair, spine curling in as though the force of the realization physically crushed her. The phones kept ringing, louder now because no one was answering them. Jonas finally slid off the table and hit the floor, the screen cracking on impact, buzzing helplessly as client after client tried to call in. An intern near the door was crying openly now, face streaked red. My job offer is going to be worthless," he whimpered, voice breaking. No one even tried to comfort him. They all felt the same thing rising in their own chests. Fear, helplessness, doom. Sloan's fingers trembled as she tried to reply to an email from the board, but she couldn't type. She slammed the laptop shut with a muffled curse, drawing in ragged breaths that sounded like sobs she wouldn't allow to escape. Jonah picked up his broken phone and hurled it at the wall, where it burst into pieces with a sound that was strangely satisfying in its finality. "This can't be happening," he kept muttering, but no one corrected him. Because it was. It was happening. The firm they'd spent decades building, the empire of deals and mergers and leverage buyouts, was crumbling like cheap plaster under the force of one simple truth they had refused to see. They had mistaken power for privilege, respect for entitlement. Ellis Corbin hadn't needed them. The boardroom was a ruin of frantic whispers and hushed curses, a place once proud and polished, now drowning in the sounds of collapse. Sloan Albright sat slumped in her chair, her hair disheveled, her face streaked with the tracks of silent tears she refused to acknowledge even as they dried on her cheeks. Jonah Reese stared blankly at the cracked screen of his ruined phone on the floor, shoulders sagging, eyes distant as if he'd been physically beaten. Around them, the junior analysts and associates typed frantically, eyes flicking to headlines that told the same humiliating truth over and over. Holloway and Price Capital implodes after $6.1 billion deal pulled. Client exodus expected. They watched the firm's stock drop in real time, saw live news updates show footage of their offices, headlines screaming about ethics failures and systemic discrimination. Calls flooded in that no one wanted to answer. Clients, investors, even their own families wanting to know if their futures were gone. And outside the thick glass walls, word spread like wildfire through the floor. The staff who had once carried themselves with chilly superiority now buzzing with fear as they watched partners argue, point fingers, and in some cases actually weep. Then the door opened slowly. Ellis Corbin stepped back in. He didn't slam it or storm it or say a word at first. He just entered quietly, the sound of his boots on the plush carpet unnaturally loud in the raw, stunned hush. Heads turned. Conversations died. The room seemed to hold its breath. Ellis walked slowly to the head of the table, the same spot they'd refused to let him truly occupy all morning. His eyes scanned the room, taking in the red faces, the tearful interns, the furious partners. He rested his bag gently on the table, but didn't open it. He didn't need his notes anymore. His voice was low, calm, and cuttingly precise. "You asked me here today to prove I was worth trusting," he began. "No one spoke. No one dared. You treated me like dirt. You laughed at me. You insulted me. You tried to humiliate me, all while asking for my money." He let that sink in. A junior associate wiped tears from his eyes, face pale and lost. Jonah Reese started to speak, but Ellis shut him down with a small shake of his head. Jonah fell silent again, swallowing visibly. Ellis continued, "You thought because I didn't look like you, didn't dress like you, didn't speak like you, that I couldn't possibly hold the power to decide your future." His voice was even. It didn't need to be raised. The words did the damage all on their own. And today, you learned the truth. You don't get to decide who matters, who's worthy, who's equal. Not anymore. Sloane raised her eyes, glassy with the weight of failure. Her voice cracked when she spoke. "Ellis," she said softly, trying to sound professional but failing. "Please, let's talk about this. We can fix this. We can rebuild trust." Around the room, heads bobbed desperately. Others wiped tears, stared at him like he was their last hope. Jonah managed to rasp, "We'll sign anything. Any terms. Just help us." Ellis stood there, watching them with eyes that were tired but clear. He didn't gloat. He didn't smirk. He didn't even look satisfied. Instead, he just looked sad. He shook his head once. "No," he said simply. "I can't trust people who treat others like that when they think they're powerless." Sloane made a small, wounded sound, and her eyes filled again. Jonah slumped, covering his face with his hands. An intern near the back of the room, the same one who had started crying during the meltdown, stood up slowly. His voice shook. "Mr. Corbin?" Ellis turned to him. The young man couldn't meet his eyes directly. I'm sorry," the intern whispered. I didn't laugh. I wanted to stop them. I just didn't." Ellis regarded him for a long moment, reading the shame and fear and guilt in his face. Then he nodded once, slow and deliberate. "What's your name?" "Kyle," the intern whispered. Ellis nodded again. "You're better than this place, Kyle." He reached into his bag and pulled out a simple white business card. He set it on the table. "Come find me when this burns down. We'll find a place for you. I value integrity." Kyle picked up the card like it was a lifeline, clutching it in shaking fingers. Around them, the partners looked on, some with raw envy, others with pure resentment. Ellis ignored them. He took one final look at the room, then turned back to Sloane. Her mascara had smeared from tears she wouldn't let fall in public, and she stared at him like she couldn't quite believe this was the end. He spoke one last time. "I'm not doing this to humiliate you," he said, voice soft but unyielding. "Justice isn't about revenge or making you feel small. It's about making sure no one else goes through what I did. You don't get my money. You don't get my partnership. But you do get a choice." Sloane blinked, too stunned to speak. "Fix yourselves," Ellis said, "or don't, but you'll do it without me." He turned, picked up his bag, and walked slowly to the door. He paused with his hand on the handle one last time. Without turning around, he spoke so they all heard him clearly. "Justice isn't humiliation. It's making sure it never happens again." Then he opened the door and walked out, leaving them behind with nothing but the ruin of what they had built, the memory of what they had done, and the chance, if they chose to take it, to be better than they had been. The end. If you enjoyed this story and want more gripping, dramatic narratives about power, justice, and human change, make sure to like and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. I'd love to know what you think about this plot. Did the ending resonate with you? Was there a moment that really hit home? Drop a comment below and share your thoughts. And tell me, where in the world are you watching from today? Let's keep this conversation going.